Good afternoon. It is Cinco de Mayo. This is Mr. Murray. I am going to be going over To Kill a Mockingbird, chapters 23 and probably chapter 24 as well. I'm going to continue to try to do 2 chapters each session. That way we get done before the end of the school year. The book, I believe, has 31 chapters, so we should be able to finish up with chapter 25, 26 on Thursday, and then hopefully squeeze through the last bit during next week. So one day I'll have to do 3 chapters. Hey, Elijah, welcome. Kennedy, welcome back. This class is going to be going over To Kill a Mockingbird. So it's chapters 23 and 24. Kennedy, you might actually not want to be in on this one just because of the spoiler to when you're in 8th grade. You guys will probably read this story, so you'd be coming in near the very end. You're welcome to stay if you want, but it's just going to kind of be the ending, or like towards the ending of To Kill a Mockingbird, so you might not want to spoil it for yourself if you read it in 8th grade. But you're welcome to stay. So anyways, what we're going to do today, we're going to go over chapters 23 and 24. So if you go into Google Classrooms, you'll see chapters 23 and 24. The summaries are already there. They'll help you for the quiz, which is posted directly under that. I think this is a slightly longer quiz than I normally give you guys, but that's just because it encompasses 2 chapters. So I think there are like 11 questions instead of the normal like 6 or so. So not too much longer, especially considering it takes, place over 2 chapters. So chapter 23. Chapter 23 takes place in the aftermath of when we find out that Mr. Ewell spit on Atticus. Miss Stephanie Crawford was like really happy to let the children know that their father had been spit on, and we kind of get the background to that in the beginning of this chapter. So Atticus doesn't really appear to be very upset. His children are, especially Jem, who wants Atticus to start carrying a gun around, maybe borrow one from a friend. Atticus refuses that. He explains that during the interaction, he told Mr. Ewell that he was too old to fight and just walked away. He also explained that during the trial, he destroyed whatever credibility Mr. Ewell had. He showed that Mr. Ewell was a liar, probably beat his children, perhaps did other types of abuse to his children as well, and he also kind of made him out to appear to be a fool when he showed everyone that he was left-handed, and he definitely tricked them into revealing that. So Mr. Ewell's credibility, even though the town still found Tom guilty, it destroyed whatever credibility he had. Because of that, Mr. Ewell kind of felt he needed a comeback of sorts. So Atticus was hoping that if he allowed Mr. Ewell to get away with spitting on him and threatening to hurt him, that would prevent Mr. Ewell from taking out his aggression on his own children, because it's pretty well known that he definitely beat Mayo, and there's also like hints of other types of abuse there as well. So Atticus says that if that prevents Mr. Ewell from beating any of his children, like he's willing to take that. So if being spit on was all that he needed to go through, he's willing to take that. Aunt Alexandra warns that Mr. Ewell might try to do something else, but Atticus kind of brushes this off. He suggests that this is over. Mr. Ewell just needed his comeback, and since he got that in public, he thinks it's over. With that, Jem and Scout kind of drop the topic as well. There's an interesting discussion that happens in this chapter about the law. Jam and Atticus sit down, and remember, Jem's 12, so he's still a child, but he's getting older. He definitely feels more adult-like, right? Let me pause for 1 second to answer this question for Kennedy. How are you supposed to... Oh, all you have to do is complete your comic book. Once you complete it, I'll be able to like go online and see it. Kennedy, you don't actually have a login to the comic site. I'll have to send you that. I'll make it as soon as this class is over. I made passwords for 8th grade and 7th grade, but I didn't do that for 6th grade. So as soon as I'm done with this at 2:30, I will create one for you, and in the 7th grade class, it will show up as a link for you. All right, Kennedy? Because if you go in now, you won't be able to actually get into the website because you don't have a login. Hey, Brandon, welcome. Malachi, welcome. We were just going over chapter 23. I was answering a couple of questions about the comic book. You guys have a comic book assignment as well. The one that Kennedy is referring to is the 7th grade one, but yours is a overview of chapters 22 or chapter 21. So if you go to the classroom, classwork assignments, there is a link that will take you to a web page that lets you create a comic book. The logins are also linked on here, so if you just go down to your first name, you can copy that and use that as your login for the comic. And like I was explaining to Kennedy, you won't actually submit the finished comic. I'll just go in and look at them periodically to see whose are complete and whose aren't. Anyways, so back to chapter 23. There's an interesting discussion about the law. Jem, who had previously said he wanted to be a lawyer, voices his frustration with Tom's trial. This is actually a fairly adult conversation. He voices that he doesn't think it was right that Tom was convicted in the first place, but he especially is upset when he finds out that Tom's going to be executed if he loses his appeals. Atticus thinks they should win the appeals, but he won't say it's a guarantee. Jem's frustrated because he thinks the juries were definitely prejudiced, which is obviously true, and he wants to replace the juries with just judges who he thinks would be more impartial and more fair. Atticus seems to disagree, and he suggests that changing the law would take a long time. If you remember back to the trial, one of the last things Atticus said was that he didn't trust systems, but he trusts people. So that kind of like shows Atticus's opinion that he would rather trust people that he knows rather than an institution that men have created. So even though the jury was definitely unfair, it doesn't seem to have completely shaken his opinion of people. I just noticed that Elijah posted, I'm being pushed to do my paperwork first. Yeah, you can do your paperwork or the online stuff, a combination of the two. You probably weren't here when I explained the time schedule for the packets. If you don't finish every single week, that's okay if you're also supplementing it with some of the online stuff. So if you say got through 4 or 5 weeks, but you also did the online stuff, that would be okay. I kind of just exempt you from some of the take-home stuff. I don't know if you were here when I explained that. Hey, Brianna, welcome. So, just trying to make sure I get through this chapter, and stop me if you have any questions over it. There's also like some other important parts that come up during this chapter. We find out that women aren't allowed to serve on juries, and this is presumably because women are too frail to handle the intricacies of the court. This is also kind of not a good argument, though, because women were allowed to go to the court as a observer. So the fact that they were able to witness the trial suggests that they were able to deal with the more delicate issues that were brought up. So it's really just like a remnant of sexism. If you remember from history, women were only given the right to vote in the 1920s. This story takes place in the 1930s. So there's still a lot of just overt sexism that takes place during this time period. And women not being able to be on a jury is kind of reflective of that. Atticus even makes kind of like a sexist joke where he says that women would probably interrupt and ask too many questions. He's definitely joking when he says this, but it does, like, that joke doesn't age well. We also learned that in the juries, they're primarily made up of people from the outskirts, so people who live away from the community, not in the city or the town itself. And that's because people are too concerned with upsetting their neighbors. Atticus gives an example of if someone who owned the store had to be on a jury between Miss Maudie and Miss Crawford, he would lose someone's business, so he would be afraid to be impartial. So that's kind of the reason why most of the juries are pulled from people who live on the outskirts. And finally, Atticus mentions that the reason that the jury took so long to come to a verdict was because one of the Cunninghams was actually on the jury. So one of the people who actually came to the jail that night and threatened to hurt Atticus, he was actually a Cunningham. So Atticus had gained his respect by standing up to him, and that's one of the reasons why it took so long for the other jury members to come to the guilty verdict, because this person actually argued for an acquittal. He eventually lost and changed his vote, but if you remember, the jury stayed in deliberations late into the night, I think well after 11 o'clock, and it was expected that they would immediately come back with a guilty verdict. So Atticus didn't win, but he didn't lose as badly as most people expected him to. Lastly, this chapter has an interesting conversation between Scout and Aunt Alexandra. And Alexandria, really, because the stories from Scout's point of view, doesn't come off as very sympathetic. And she gets into an argument with Scout where Scout suggests they invite Walter Jr. over to their house for supper and to play and just goof off, do kid stuff. It's very innocent. It seems like she's impressed with the fact that another Cunningham had tried to support Atticus, so it's kind of like almost a way to say thank you. She explains that Atticus can ride him home afterwards in their car, but the aunt doesn't want her to hang out with people who are lower class, and because the Cunninghams are a lot poorer than Scout and Alexandria, and Alexandra tells her no, that she can't hang out with them. She needs to be nice to him when she sees him, but she can't have him over, and she shouldn't be associating with them. She explains that the Cunninghams are trash, and therefore Scout's not allowed to play with them. Definitely not at home. And she also makes a point to say that Scout is a problem to Atticus. This causes Scout to cry, and she kind of runs away. Jem consoles her, but Scout's big thing is that she doesn't believe that she's a problem to Atticus. They had this conversation earlier, but she doesn't think that the aunt likes her, so she's unwilling to change her behavior to appease her aunt, because she just thinks her aunt hates her, which you can kind of see in the conversation they have. Scout also mentions to Jem that the main reason that she cries, or the only reason that she cries, is because the way that Alexandria talks about the Cunninghams, kind of like she sees that as so unfair that this is her time to cry. So Dill cried because people were being mean to Tom during the trial. Jem cries because the world's not fair, and he has trouble coming to terms with that after the trial. Scout cries when it affects someone she knows, right? So they each have a different breaking point. Dill's willing to cry and break down over the fact that someone's being treated cruelly. He doesn't know Tom, he's never interacted with Tom, so just seeing someone else being treated in such a cruel way causes Dill to cry. Jem's breaking point is when he finds out like the adult world isn't fair. By this point he's 12, he knows that like life isn't fair all the time, but he expects at least like institutions like the court to be fair, because he still trusts adults, so he thinks that like the adults treat each other fairly. When he sees that's not the case, he breaks down. Scout's breaking point is when it's someone she knows who's treated unfairly. So she knows Walter's not trash, but when the aunt calls him trash, that's her breaking point. So they all have their own breaking points throughout the last couple of chapters. It's just interesting how each character's breaking point comes about. The last bit of the chapter deals with Jem and Scout discussing life in general. We've talked about how there's a hierarchy to the town of Macomb, how you have the wealthier people at the top, the poorer people at the bottom. Jem thinks he has this all figured out, and he explains there are regular people like their family, then there are families like who live out in the country, such as the Cunninghams, and then below them are people like the Ewells, and then below them are the African Americans. Jem thinks that each group is inclined to dislike the people beneath them on the social structure, so he thinks it makes sense that Aunt Alexandria doesn't like the Cunninghams because they're below their standing on the social structure. It also explains why the Ewells hated Tom so much, because they were below them. But Scout disagrees. She pokes some holes in the argument. She mentions that the Cunninghams should have been inclined to hate the Ewells, so they should have acquitted Tom just to spite the Ewells. And she also makes a few other comments. It also doesn't hold up when you take into account how Atticus treats the people who would be beneath him on the social rung. He's kind to the Cunninghams. He tries to treat Mayo Ewell with some respect, and he's kind to the African Americans in the community. So it doesn't hold up perfectly. So Scout disagrees, and she tries to argue that there's one type of people, and they're all the same. Jem disagrees. They have a bit of a back and forth here. Jem tries to justify his argument that it has something to do with education, such as when a family became educated, that's how high they are on the social structure. Scout disagrees with this as well, and she points out that the only reason Walter Cunningham doesn't read very well is because he always misses school to help his dad on the farm. So she's pretty logical in trying to disprove Jem's social hierarchy. Jem's view of people does coincide a lot more with his aunt's, whereas Scout's view of people coincides more with Atticus. So Jem's trying to take the world as it is and understand it. He's missing some of the components, but he's closer to Aunt Alexandria's view. Scout's more idealistic, and she's looking at it as all people are basically the same, so we're all basically equal, which is closer to how Atticus views the world. So they're both kind of voicing and justifying the views of the adults who they've interacted with the most. Jem also, at the very end of the chapter, points out that he thinks he understands Boo Radley. He thinks that Boo wants to stay in his house, that he doesn't want to come out, probably because he thinks people are just awful and wants to stay away from them. So now we've had at the end of a couple of chapters, Dill and Jem both sort of understanding Boo at some point, some level at least. So Jem thinks Boo has seen all the problems in the world and wants to avoid people because people are just kind of hurtful at some level. So that's chapter 23. I'm going to quickly go through chapter 24 so you guys can do the quiz. I'm not sure what the I hate dogs comments about, but all right, Kennedy. So chapter 24. Chapter 24 completely deals with Scout and Aunt Alexandria's party. So we find out in the beginning of the chapter that Dill can't swim. Jem thinks that's just an awful thing that someone can't swim, so he teaches him. But because they're going to go skinny dipping, they won't let Scout come along. So out of boredom, Scout joins Aunt Alexandria's Saturday party with the other ladies for a missionary circle. So this is where a bunch of the women get together and they talk about how to help people who live in distant countries. So the party's very formal. Scout has to wear her Sunday dress. Scout also realizes that if she gets her dress dirty, Calpurnia will have to clean it that night because she has to go to church tomorrow, and she doesn't want to cause extra work for Calpurnia, which demonstrates at some level her respect and caring. Sorry, just pause 1 second. Are we close to finding out how her brothers are broke? I'm not sure. Oh, his arm. How his arm broke? You are very close to that. That's in the last couple of chapters. That's awesome that you remembered that, Brianna, because that's what the whole story is about. So that's great that you remembered that. No, that's coming though. Because it seems like the story's kind of petering out. We're just getting the aftermath of the trial. But yeah, there's still one more real exciting part to the story. Kind of a little action-packed at the end. So it's good that you remember that. We'll get to that. It's not this chapter, though, but good memory. So where was I? Scout's demonstrating her care of Calpurnia. So she doesn't want to cause Calpurnia extra work. There's also a part where she stays in the kitchen and is watching Calpurnia. Calpurnia opens a door by kind of just like using her backside to open it. Scout tries to do that too, but she fails, so Calpurnia kind of sees it's kind of like a cute moment between the two of them. But that's awesome. You guys remember that thing about Jem's arm, because it's coming. We're just not there yet. There's a controversial topic at this party the women are holding. So we find out that basically all the women, the older women at least, are at this party. And Aunt Alexandra is in her element because she loves being the center of attention. She likes being a good hostess. Remember, she's older. She's probably in her 50s, kind of like Atticus. They're both older. But she's also more grandmotherly, right? Because she's already raised her children. She already has a grandchild. So she has less of the parental responsibilities that Atticus has. And what's happening during this party is they're discussing a mission over in Africa. So there apparently is this missionary who's working over in Africa with this tribe of people. He's trying to teach them the American ways. He's also trying to just help them in general become more educated. The women think this guy's just amazing. So the fact that he's going all the way over to Africa to help these people, they think's great. There's some irony in this, though, because they're actually living in a very segregated state, right? So it's the 1930s, segregation, Jim Crow laws are still around. Tom was just convicted of something that we know there's no way he did, just because of racism. And the women don't seem to see a problem with that. But they see this person over in another continent helping people as a great thing. They also, during their conversations, they mentioned Atticus, right? So they mentioned that Atticus was wrong to try to change things here, but they think it's okay for someone to try to change things a continent away, which is kind of odd that none of them pieced together the fact that Atticus is trying to do the exact same thing that this missionary is doing, just in their own neighborhood, and they don't praise him for that. In fact, they kind of talk down about him for doing that, but someone who lives really far away and then across the ocean, they think that's great. It's interesting how they don't make that connection. Scout eventually does join the ladies for dessert. Scout makes a mistake where she mentions that her pants are actually tucked in under her dress, and Miss Maudie asks her this question kind of innocently, where are your pants at? And Scout mentions that they're rolled up under her dress. So Miss Maudie wasn't trying to make a joke at Scout's expense, but the rest of the girls, or the rest of the women, think it's hilarious that she's still wearing her pants, so they all laugh at her. Everyone except Miss Maudie. Remember, Miss Maudie never laughs at Scout unless she intends for something to be funny. So all the women start laughing at Scout. Miss Stephanie Crawford also kind of mocks her on maybe wanting to grow up to be a lawyer. Scout tries to change the subject by saying she just wants to be a lady, and then Miss Stephanie Crawford suggests that she's not proper enough to be a lady. So they're really just kind of making fun of this little girl, which is kind of messed up. They're all full-grown adults who should know better, and Scout's 9. So the fact that all but Miss Maudie and Aunt Alexandra are kind of just actively laughing at this little girl's kind of messed up. Miss Maudie holds Scout's hand for support, because again, she's kind of like that grandmotherly figure to Scout. Maudie is trying to help Scout learn how to ignore rude people, which echoes Atticus's earlier suggestion that she shouldn't fight every time she was offended. So it shows that Scout is becoming more mature, even though the people around her are definitely acting very immature. I know we only have 5 minutes left, so I'll try to go kind of quick. Eventually, the conversation does turn towards Atticus. At this point, Scout's getting what's being said only in pieces, so she's missing large sections of the conversation. Remember, she's only 9, so she's missing some of what's going on. The conversation's basically about how Miss Merriweather is upset that Tom's wife, Helen, is so upset and distraught over the trial. So she suggests that Helen just needs to get over it, which is kind of crazy, because Tom was convicted of something he definitely didn't do, and he could possibly be executed. And there's this older woman who's just like, yeah, she needs to get over that. Also, the same woman brings up the fact that it was wrong of Atticus to even try to help Tom, because all he did was rile everybody up. Which, again, is really crazy, because they're talking about how this guy on another continent is doing such a great thing trying to help people in Africa, when Atticus is trying to help people who are disadvantaged where they live, and they don't see an association. Scout doesn't get upset here, mainly because she's missing a lot of what's being said, because they're not saying Atticus's name. They're just suggesting that some people need to stop riling people up. So she doesn't realize they're talking about her dad. Miss Maudie does, though, and Miss Maudie starts to become upset, at which point Aunt Alexandria changes the topic, demonstrating her ability to navigate social circles. Some bad news interrupts this, though. Atticus actually interrupts the party. He calls Calpurnia and Aunt Alexandria into the kitchen. Scout and Miss Maudie follow. Atticus explains that Tom was really upset that he was convicted, and he didn't trust that he would win an appeal. So while he was in the prison yard, he tried to run away. He made it as far as the fence and partway up the fence, but then he was shot in the back, something crazy like 17 times. Atticus is really upset because he realizes that even though Tom was discouraged, he really thought they could probably win that appeal, but he was unwilling to tell Tom, we can definitely win, because he wasn't 100% sure, and that's just who Atticus is. So he won't lie to somebody, even to make someone feel better. So he asks Calpurnia to come with him to inform Helen of Tom's death. So we can see that he's like very shaken from this, and he wants kind of someone who knows Helen to come with him. So he wants Calpurnia to come help break the news. So he leaves. This leaves Aunt Alexandria really shaken, which is odd that this is her breaking point, right? So again, we had gone through everybody's breaking point, and Aunt Alexandria's breaking point is over Atticus. So because she feels that the town has put him in an unfair position, like the townspeople who don't agree with segregation and who don't agree with racism weren't willing to stand up and help him, leaving him to do basically all the hard work on his own. So now the people at the party who are kind of making fun of Atticus because he tried to do something he couldn't succeed at, and kind of mocking him, like, you know, in the open or behind closed doors. And Alexandria is very upset about this, because remember, Atticus is her older brother, so this would kind of be like that relationship that Jem and Scout have. Scout gets really upset when people mess with her older brother. It's very similar there. Aunt Alexandria gets the same talk from Miss Maudie that Miss Maudie gave Jem a few chapters ago, where it's kind of an honor that the townspeople are paying Atticus because they trust him to do the right thing. They believe in him as like a leader of sorts. This helps Aunt Alexandria. She was definitely crying prior to talking to Miss Maudie, but she's able to straighten herself up and then go back to the party. This is like the first chapter where we really see some like humanity out of Aunt Alexandria, where she finally breaks down a little bit. She shows compassion for her brother. She shows some like protectiveness towards and devotion towards her family, and she also shows some weakness. And Miss Maudie's there to step in and kind of help her out. I know I'm out of time, so I'll go really quick. The lessons in this chapter are that Scout begins to understand Miss Maudie and Aunt Alexandria's definition of being a lady, and it coincides with Atticus's definition of courage, the idea that you need to stand tall even when you don't think you will succeed. So Miss Maudie and Aunt Alexandria go back to this party, which is openly hostile towards Atticus and what he had been trying to do, and they're able to like kind of navigate that situation. So Scout knows that she can't win. She knows she can't do anything to help Tom. Throughout the chapter, she had talked about how she had daydreamed about being a governor so that she could have fixed the situation. She knows she can't do anything, so she just goes back to the party and tries to put on a brave front. Similarly, Aunt Alexandra can't do anything to help Atticus, so she goes back to the party and puts on a brave face. She doesn't want to let the people who are mocking her family member know that they're hurting her, because that would give them a victory, so she's not willing to let them see that. So this chapter humanizes Aunt Alexandria to a point, shows her devotion to her brother. It also shows Scout developing some respect for her aunt, because in previous chapters, actually in the chapter 23, Scout mentioned that she didn't think her aunt even liked her. So we kind of see some respect bubbling back and forth between the two. The aunt showing Scout some devotion when she asks Scout to stay at the party, and Aunt Alexandra is showing devotion to Atticus, which will only build that bridge between her and Scout. So, I know I'm over. When you go to the classwork, there's a quiz, has 11 questions, so feel free to get on that at your earliest convenience. There's no video for this chapter. If you want to watch the movie, if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch the movie at your convenience. If not, if you go to the classwork, near the very bottom, there's a link to a play version, so you can always watch that if you want a visual. So, I will make sure I put that comic link for you, Kennedy, and everybody else, have a great day.